Etzel, as you may know, I have spent a good part of the last 18 months investigating all different theories of consciousness and wrote a big review article on it. And in doing that, I found that there was a reasonable number of scientists and philosophers, small in percentage, but more than a few, that utilized out-of-body experiences, and particularly near-death experiences, as the primary motivation to come up with a theory of consciousness. Now, some of them came up with different theories of consciousness. They all had a non-physical component, but some were dualists, some were idealists, some were panpsychic, whatever it was. They had different results, but they were all non-physical. But the point is that they were initially induced by an out-of-body experiences or reports of that. So from your work that you've done, how do you reflect on the nature of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences on their impact on the nature of consciousness?
Yes. Unfortunately, I have done research on both of them, and I'll tell you what I think they have taught me. First, some very highly hypnotizable people took part in a study where I just asked them to go as deeply into hypnosis as they could, and I interviewed them every 5 minutes, and they all, it was a small group, but they all spontaneously reported coming out of their bodies, flying, just being out of their bodies. What does this tell me? I think one thing is that our notion of what our bodies are depends on a large degree on a concept that Charles Starr talked about, on loading stabilization, that we are seeing ourselves in reflections, in mirrors, in reflective surfaces, and so on. When we talk to each other, we are looking at our heights, and thus we are keeping a certain amount of sense of what our bodies are like. But when we reduce stimulation or when we increase it a lot, suddenly we find out that our bodies are creations, our sense of bodies are creations. So in the case of the hypnotizable people, they were in one condition, just lying down, not moving, but continuing to pay attention to their experience, to their conscious state. Just with that, they all feel that they come out of their bodies. They fly out, nothing more. Did they, quote unquote, actually fly out? I would say, well, one needs to think, what do you mean by actually fly out? But I would say in most cases, if I were to tell them, go and see what is in the top of that building, I think that the vast majority could not say anything that was demonstrable. There are exceptions, but there are few exceptions. I think mostly what it tells us is that is one of the many creations we have. We create our view of reality, or perceptual reality, and we also create our notion of who we are as bodies. You change that?
Look, that makes eminent sense, that this is a reflection on what we create, but the fact that when you do the out-of-body, you're not able to read the numbers on top of a building, and there have been some studies that try to do that. And so that means that this has no relationship to what ultimate reality of consciousness is. It's just our self-creation of it, and it can be very easily interpreted in a purely physicalist world.
Yeah, except what is a physicalist world when you start taking into consideration the physics from 20th century onwards that ended up questioning what is an atom. Looks like just vibrations that are always in relation.
Yes.
So for instance, right now, the relational theory of quantum mechanics is that there are no such thing as things. It's just relations. So I think that we should apply that all throughout and say, this has a lot to do, a lot to say about our mind and our mind's contact with apprehension of reality. Please,
so this is for out-of-body experiences. So the creation of that is real. It reflects on what we're doing, but they're not literally going out of their body because they're unable to bring back information that could only be accessible if they were really going out of their body. And so that's fair. How about near-death experiences, which give some people, many people who had it, the confidence that there is a greater reality, that there's a spiritual reality, and that all is well with ultimate existence.
Well, what I would say is there is an enormous greater reality all around us, all the time, and we are mostly being focused in our inner interest, even without talking about parapsychological phenomena. There is just so much richness and beauty all around that we have forgotten. I have an almost 6-year-old, and it just surprises me how open he is to the wealth in the world. And I have just thought how much we lose when we grow up and then we are thinking about being focused on having good words to answer to your questions and disregarding everything else. So even leaving aside psi phenomena, there is an enormous wealth. By the way, incidentally, he has had a few instances of events that I could say they sound a lot like parapsychological phenomena, where he reacted to someone before that person appeared on the road with no good explanation for how that would happen. But even leaving that aside, I would say there's an enormous wealth, and we are just having a very tiny bit that depends also on our culture. The same thing happens in near-death experience. And just to round up a bit, one thing that is important to say about near-death experience, 2 things. The first one is that most of those phenomena were phenomena that were spontaneously reported in my study with highly hypnotizable people, and that have been reported in people just meditating. So it is not as if, well, this happens only when you are close to dying. No. So probably that means that they are not particularly or exclusively related to dying.
Well, that's an important ontological fact, because that undermines a lot of the theories that people who've had the near-death experiences conclude, because they conclude that they really did see the next world, and there really is a light, meaning bright light, God figure or religious figure that in their culture they see, and they really believe that to be true. What you're saying is that result is similar for various kinds of altered states, which undermines their ontological belief. It doesn't undermine the experience, but it undermines what they conclude to be the evidence that near-death experience is evidence of an afterlife.
I would go with that, and I would not go with the notion that it undermines the ontological value not only as experience, but as the possibility, and I mentioned possibility, that in those states we may have a sense of something that we ordinarily do not perceive.
But you can get that through different mechanisms.
Correct, absolutely,
It's the same.
and not necessarily being close to dying. Bruce Grayson, I would say the most important researcher on near-death experiences. Yeah. And this does not necessarily have to do with dying. It has to do with the nature of consciousness being able to open to other aspects. And I would go with that. I don't think it is a proof of survival.